My name is Christian Berger. I am an Austrian citizen from Vienna, and I was born at a time when Europe was divided into two parts. I was born 50 kilometers on the west side of the Iron Curtain that divided what is today the European Union. And I was also born only 15 years after the end of the Second World War. So this is a very important, I think, aspect of anyone's history, because it defines actually your life that comes after that.
From Austria's hills to the world so wide, Christian Berger sails with the EU's pride, through deserts and seas where nations divide. He bridges the gap with diplomacy as his guide.
I spent my first years in Austria. So I went to school, and I also went to university, first in Vienna, but then I decided also to explore the world a little bit. First with the United Nations as a peacekeeper in Syria, and then also I continued my studies in London and finished there also a law degree. And after that, I joined the United Nations and worked with the UN mainly in the Middle East, before joining the European Union on this in my current sort of line of career in diplomatic service of the European Union.
He's a voice for peace, for hope, for truth, devoted to the EU's lasting roots. In every land where the flags are unfurled, he stands for Europe, uniting the world.
Well, you know, my family comes from different parts of Europe. My father's side always stayed in the same town near Vienna for almost 500 years. On my mother's side, there were economic migrants in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. On my wife's side is a completely different story. My wife is Greek, and she herself was born in Athens, but her family comes from the Pontus area, which is today Turkey, on the Black Sea coast. Greeks from there who left in 1923, and one of her grandfathers comes from Egypt. He was a Greek living in Alexandria. So it's a interesting mixture of different backgrounds, and we have two children who are currently living and working in Brussels.
A father, a husband, with love so pure, with Marilena by his side, steadfast and sure. Together they nurture, with hearts full of grace, a family bound by warmth and embrace.
Please welcome our host for tonight, Ambassador Christian Berger, head of the European Union delegation to Egypt.
He's a voice for peace, for hope, for truth, devoted to the EU's lasting roots. In every land where the flags are unfurled, he stands for Europe, uniting the world.
Well, if I can do any readings apart from official papers, it is mainly books on history, on this part of the world, on the Middle East, on Egypt, on the Mediterranean, mainly along those lines. And sometimes I enjoy reading also biographies, so to see how people have dealt with particular problems, big problems that the world has been facing. It's difficult to say I like any particular music, but of course, coming from Austria, classical music, from Mozart to Beethoven. Beethoven, for example, composed his famous Ninth Symphony in my hometown, so not very far from where I lived. So that of course influences your taste over the years. So classical music.
Passion for culture, for music, for art. He finds in each note a way to the heart. Through books and ideas, his mind expands. A diplomat's wisdom shaped by life's hands.
I try to combine the job with some interest, and that is both my wife and I, we like to visit the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. There are more than 1,000 in the world, so it's a big job. So in whichever country I am, I for sure I visit all the UNESCO sites. So I'm also doing this here in Egypt, to visit whenever I can the sites that are on the list, but also the sites that are on the tentative list. I mean, there are two lists. So on one there are about 8-9 different sites, and on the other one I think there's some 20 or 25 sites. So one by one. And I hope by the time I leave from here, I've done all of them.
In every symphony, in every page turned, a love for knowledge deeply burned.
My grandparents, one of my grandfathers died in the war as a soldier. The other one actually was persecuted by the Nazis. My parents were born in the bomb hails of the Second World War. In the early 1940s. And this is the reason why we have the European Union today, because 7 years after the Second World War ended, some people came together, very wise people came together and said enough is enough. We have had 1,000 years of wars in Europe. Different countries, different nations fighting each other, over more than 1,000 years.
L'Europe n'a pas été faite, nous avons eu la guerre. L'Europe ne se fera pas d'un coup, ni dans une construction d'ensemble. Elle se fera par des réalisations concrètes, créant d'abord une solidarité de fait.
And they decided that in order to stop wars from happening, you need to control the means of warfare. And what are the means of warfare? Energy, and so that at the time it was coal, and building, and the material you use for weapons, steel. So steel and coal became administered by by community, the steel and coal community. And this is the first, the nucleus of the European Union, which then developed into an economic union, which was the European communities, and which then also developed into a political union. This then became the European Union. And with the Treaty of Lisbon, this is the formation, the structure that we have today. But at the beginning of this stands the big desire to end conflict in Europe and create a peaceful continent. Actually, we got the Peace Nobel Prize for that in 2012, not because we are peacemakers, but because we are a peace project.
He's a voice for peace, for hope, for truth, devoted to the EU's lasting roots. In every land where the flags are unfurled, he stands for Europe, uniting the world.
Europe can only be united by the heartfelt wish and vehement expression.
So that is, I think, that stands at the origin of the European Union. Of course, today it's a union of 27 nations, sovereign nations that have come together and decided that certain things we want to do together. Certain things will be the sole responsibility of Brussels, where the capital of the European Union is. And I'll give you one example, that is trade. So when we reach trade agreements with any of our partners, it has to be done with the European Union, not with the individual member states. So this is one example. But there are many other examples where the European Union takes the lead, and that's the important thing. The European Union, the European Commission in the Union has the right of legislative initiative. So we can come up with ideas, concepts that need to be then transformed into legislation, which then get adopted by the European Parliament and the member states of the European Union, and they become law across the 27 nations of the European Union. So that's, in a nutshell, the origin of the European Union. That's a peace project, but it's also a project that is supporting and fostering the lives of the citizens of the European Union.
He's a voice for peace, for hope, for truth, devoted to the EU's lasting roots. In every land where the flags are uniting the world.
I mean, my work in, I would say I had two starting points. One was in a military career when I was not only in the Austrian army, but also later on with the Austrian army in Syria on the Golan as a peacekeeper. So that was my first sort of presence and job in the Middle East. And then later on, I worked for the United Nations. I continued working for the United Nations, but also on the civilian side. And my very first job was in a refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. And now, many years later, this camp is still there, which shows you how difficult the situation is for many people involved here. And then I stayed with the UN for 8-9 years. Then I moved back to Vienna to work with the OSCE. And then when Austria joined the European Union in 1995, I took the necessary exams that you had to take. And I also joined then the European Union. And since '96, I've been working for the EU, mainly on external relations or diplomatic areas. I was director for the Middle East, Morocco to Iraq for 6-7 years. I was ambassador in Turkey. I was also head of the representation office in Al-Quds in Jerusalem for the Palestinians, and then here in Egypt since 2020.
Across the Nile, in Egypt's embrace, he works for progress at a steady pace. With every handshake, with every plan, he builds a future hand in hand.
I would say that the job of diplomats today is a completely different one than it was, let's say, 50 years ago, even 30 years ago, and that has to do with communication. Today, ministers, presidents, top officials communicate with each other. In the past, they would have communicated through diplomats, exchanging notes, sending letters, and these things. So that has really changed, and you have to adapt to this. But it also has its important good sides. First of all, everything can work much faster, much more direct. So the work that I think that we have to do now as representatives, we have to make sure that this relationship runs smoothly, that there are no hiccups, that there are no misunderstandings. You also have to interpret what you find in a country, explain to your capital what is the situation, why do people do things in a certain way, what do they have in mind, what is the background, and the other way around. I mean, I also have to explain in a third country wherever I am, why does the European Union does things in a certain way. You have to, because very often there are misunderstandings when you don't understand the reason why you do things. So it's very often, so I think the job is important in the sense that you have to explain how things are being done, why things are being done, and how the relationship could be taken to a next level, to a higher level.
For trade, for climate, for dreams that grow, he plants the seeds where the rivers flow. In every corner, his mission remains to weave together peace through chains.
Patience and listening. You need to really listen to people and really understand what they have in mind. But what you need in multilateral diplomacy is you really need to listen to different partners, because you deal with a big group of countries or in a conference with a big number of people. You need to really find out what is their intention, their motive, what do they want, what do they want to get out of it, so that for everyone it's a success. It's a win-win situation. I know it sounds like a slogan, but I think it's very important that you have to walk away from a conference, from a negotiation, from a multilateral negotiation with a product that you can live with, that you think you were successful in achieving it.
Trade and growth, his mission soared, fostering ties that open new doors. In Egypt's markets, with vision so bright, he paved the way for futures light. He championed investment, breaking new ground, where EU and Egypt's hopes were found. With partnerships strong, he led the way, launching a conference that shaped the day. The EU-Egypt bond was his call, uniting both nations, standing tall. In trade, in trust, his efforts shone, building a legacy all his own.
Is listening to other people, understanding them, and putting yourself in their shoes, so you can see the world also from their eyes, because it affects then the way you are operating. I was saying before, I once attended a lecture by Lakhdar Brahimi, a former Algerian foreign minister, who then also became the UN envoy for Syria. And he was telling us what is important for a diplomat in a third country. Get out of the capital. Speak to people who maybe don't speak English or don't speak French, because you really need to get a sense of the country. I think it's a very important advice to get really a feeling of where you are.
Good morning. Great pleasure being here, Frank. Thank you very much for the invitation. 2022 for the European Union is the year of the youth. So we want to, of course, expand this and translate this also in our engagement with our partners in the Mediterranean, with Egypt. So I'm very happy to be here during this European month in Alexandria, this European week, focusing on environment and climate change.
And making sure that when I leave a place, that the relationship between the country and the European Union is in a better shape, has maybe being taken even to a higher level. I think this is what you want to look back and see as a success.
With quiet strength and a steady stride, he keeps the EU's hopes alive. Through every crisis, through darkest night, his faith in unity shines so bright. Now, as his journey moves ever on, the world is better for the battles he's won. Christian Berger with a heart so true, forever devoted to the EU.
Why do wars start? Because diplomats have failed. When wars end, you again need diplomats to set up a peaceful, environment and arrangement. So I think, therefore, the way diplomats are doing this is very important, because you want to set something up that remains, that does not fall apart in the next year, in the next 2 years, the next 10 years, but that survives. So I would say the diplomats that, for example, set up the United Nations in 1945, they did exactly that. Coming out of a devastating war period, the Second World War, creating a new world order that was, taking this into account and say this must never happen again. So I think that's the important contribution here. The contribution of diplomacy to world peace or making world, you see it all along. You always, when you had a conflict, when you had a war, then you always had, of course, in most cases, afterwards you had a peace conference where diplomats came together and created something that was sustainable. For me, one of the biggest achievements of diplomats is the Congress of Vienna in 1815, that after the Napoleonic Wars, a system was created in Europe that lasted for almost 100 years until the First World War. And it was done in a way that allowed people to walk away from this conference with having achieved something, walking away eye to eye, not being looked down, not being punished or whatever. So I think this was the achievement of Metternich, of Talleyrand, and of Castlereagh in 1815, and you can read it in Henry Kissinger's book on diplomacy. I think that's a very powerful book in describing what diplomacy is. Diplomacy and peacemaking is not reserved for one group of professions, not for diplomats only. I think diplomacy and peacemaking must be the tasks of everyone. This is something that the entire human race must be involved in.
He's a voice for peace, for hope, for truth, devoted to the EU's lasting roots. In every land where the flags are unfurled, he stands for Europe, uniting the world.
I think what you do here to describe the diplomatic journeys of individual ambassadors is really great, because it gives you inspiration. You see what other people have gone through, you see what other people have achieved, you can learn from it, you can see, you can appreciate your colleague much better, because you touch also personal issues. So you need the whole personality in order to understand somebody, and I think a project like this allows you to do this.